Hello and welcome to part 2 of the AtTheRaces.com betting special. My name is Kevin Blake and I'm delighted to be joined once again by At The Races Hugh Taylor. And in part 1 of this series, Hugh and I discussed race reading and the various theories that drive how we assess racing. In this part, we're going to hone in on betting strategy and the all-important winner backing process. So to start off with you, I think the only place to start on this question is the V word, value. It's perhaps one of the most misunderstood things in racing, one of the most annoyingly misunderstood things in racing. So could you explain, I suppose, as succinctly as you can, what does the word value mean to you in a betting sense?
I've heard so many discussions about value between people some who are big proponents of finding value, some who aren't and see it as a red herring. Obviously, I wouldn't agree with that necessarily, but I just think it's a bit of a. I don't think it's the best way of describing what we're actually looking for in the winner seeking method these days. I'd definitely say, instead of saying, asking people, are you a value punter or just find the best, find the winner punter, I'd say, are you a probabilistic punter or a deterministic punter? Because that's a more straightforward question to answer in a lot of ways. If you're a probabilistic, I can't pronounce it, punter, you're basically concerned with the percentage likelihood of horses winning, which would equate, of course, to what people are often talking about with value punters. Whereas if you're a deterministic punter, you're just looking for the winner. And you quite often hear punters in this second camp talking in much more vague terms, in my opinion, than those in the first camp. They'll talk about the horse that they fancy. They'll talk about good things. They'll talk about no chance, can't have that on my mind. It's all very vague and imprecise, in my opinion. And I would certainly see myself more in the probabilism camp, fully in the probabilism camp, looking at each horse in terms of what I think its chances are of winning and whether the odds available are better than that. That's as simple as I can put it, without necessarily needing to get bogged down with a V word.
Yeah, I suppose ultimately you're trying to know the event that you're assessing so well and the participants that you're essentially looking to find the ones that are the wrong price and capitalizing on that.
Yeah, you see, quite often people who don't really agree with the concept of value seeking will say that people like me will find theoretical value, but we don't really think it can win, or we don't fancy it. But to me, there's a cut-off point for every horse at which you would back it or not back it. And that's what you need to be looking for. You need to be, you look at it both ways when you're pricing up a horse as well, whether you'd be happy backing it, also whether you'd be happy laying it. And for people who talk in terms of just, I fancy it, I think it'll win, I would just ask them the question, okay, well, what price will you back it at? Will you back it at, 5 to 1, 4 to 1, 3 to 1? 2 to 1. Will you back it at 1 to 3? Will you back it at 1 to 10? Because if your concern is finding the likely winner, then there's an easy way to just massively improve your strike rate. Just wait and back every horse that's 1 to 5 or shorter. You'll back nearly all winners. You won't make any money out of it probably, but you'll find lots of winners. And if that's all that you're bothered about, then that's going to improve on your strike rate. That's as simple a way as I can put it, really.
Yeah, it's one of those, you can debate the theory behind this. I know which way I'd be coming down, but you can debate the theory, and the proponents of the alternative to what we're getting behind here can make their arguments. But for me, if I wanted to put it to someone as simply as I could, I know, and it's something we're going to deal with in a little bit more detail later in this section. I keep very, very detailed records of all my betting going back years and years and years, over 10 years, every single bet. Record the price I took, the best price that was available, the SP. Unfortunately, I didn't record the Betfair SP all along, but the spreadsheet is set up in such a way that it will tell me my profit, what it would have been if I could have availed at the best price, what I did profit at the price I took, and what I would have profited at SP. And the difference between the profit at the price I took and SP is just absolutely colossal. You know, at SP, it's a very small minus. You know, at Betfair SP, it would have been a minor plus, but it's a massive, massive difference, you know, because that tells me that if I put in the exact same amount of work, the tens of thousands of hours that went into finding every bet that's on that spreadsheet, if I had them all at SP, all the work would have been for nothing. It would have essentially broke even over the years because I didn't get the best value price. I wasn't capitalizing on the price discrepancy when it was available. You know, and that to me is the greatest evidence you could ever produce, or an example like that to show that price is absolutely all important. Price is what dictates your margin. It's not good enough to be a really good judge if you're of what's going to win a horse race if you're not a really good judge of what the correct price of that possibility occurring is, and being able to capitalize when you spot mistakes in those prices.
Absolutely. It's basically what separates the good judges from the bad is whether they're a good judge of a price, not whether they're a good judge of a likely winner. And that's why it frustrates me so much when people say, well, what's your record at SP? I don't know. I don't care. I don't bet at SP. I haven't had an SP bet in the last 20 years. Whether or not you're a good judge of in terms of betting on horse racing is, as you quite rightly say, it's whether you're a good judge of whether the odds are value or not. And if you don't know what the odds are going to be, you can't possibly be judged on that.
And just on that point, you know, record keeping. You know, if any time on the rare occasions anyone asks me for advice about betting, it's always top of the list for me. I feel it's so important for people to keep as detailed records as possible. I know it's a difficult thing to do if you're the type of punter that has a lot of bets, but the more detailed records one keeps, I think will just lead to improvement, and will just be a help to any bettor, in my opinion. It doesn't just help identify what you're good at or what you're bad at. It can also help with something we'll deal with a little bit later again, it's losing runs. You know, and just being able to look back at the past and realize that even if one is in a losing run now, that well, I can see from 3 years ago, I had a significantly worse losing run than this, and I came out of it and I still had a profitable year, and you can use that as a source of comfort. You know, how deep would your record keeping be personally?
Nowadays, not very deep at all, because other than that, all my bets are recorded on the At the Races web. All my tips are recorded on the At the Races website, and I don't actually back that many horses that I don't tip, because, you know, I'd love to tell you that the really good bets are the ones I keep back for myself and I back them after the comes down, but sadly that's not true. You know, ones that I think are the best bets are the ones I put up on At the Races, and I try to back them. Sometimes I can't because the price has gone like everybody else, but I try and back them all. But going back to what you were saying about keeping track of your losing runs and that kind of thing, there hasn't been a year since I've been tipping, this is going back to 2009, where I haven't had some sort of run where somebody's come up on Twitter and said to me, where's it all gone wrong, Hugh? Every year, every single year that's happened. Where's it all gone wrong? Why have you, you know, not why are you in a bad rut, but, you know, and it happened more last year because I actually did have a particularly less successful year compared to some of my other years. I didn't have a great year at all, really. And but every year people have asked me that same question, and it does help because you then go back and look at what you thought at the time were horrific losing runs and actually were just part and parcel of life's rich betting tapestry.
Yeah, I recall one of the days you're on At the Races, you put up a visual that really hammered home what you were saying. I think you took a graph and you said, right, this is, you correct me if I'm wrong now, I'm operating from memory, and this was a graphical representation of a run you'd been on, and it was basically a downward graph. that looked quite horrendous. But then you essentially zoomed out and put that piece of the graph into your full year. And of course, the graph went a little bit like this. That was the bit we saw, and then normality returned. And overall, the graph looked very rosy. But if one reduced the sample size and honed in this particular run, it obviously looked horrendous. But the point you were making is that you have to take these things in bigger sample sizes over long periods of time, and that even if one hits a fairly horrendous run of form, if things continue, if you stay on the right track and keep doing what's worked all along, the variance will balance out and you'll end up reaching the destination that you were hoping to reach all along.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to bear in mind that things do change in horse racing betting. Patterns change, markets change, things that work 5 years ago might not work anymore. So you can't just rest on your laurels and just assume you're always going to go on that upward curve. But yeah, it is important to keep a sense of perspective and to try and keep the long term in mind and try and work out. I mean, one year, just having a lot of seconds rather than, having 10 horses that finish second rather than first at reasonable prices can make a massive difference. Fairly random things like that can make a huge difference to how things work out overall.
Yeah, and for someone like you, Hugh, like you say, you've been on in the At the Races role for 10 years. Your profit figures are there for all to see. They're truly, genuinely remarkable. But for someone that's been doing it in a set way for so long, and you've seen these losing runs come and go, I can't imagine that being a level-headed character like you are, I can't imagine there's much scope for self-doubt in terms of your ability at this stage. But what I'm asking is, would the biggest source of concern for you when you do hit one of these runs, would it be what you mentioned there earlier, that perhaps the game is changing a little bit and perhaps the way that you've been doing things might not represent as big an edge as it once did? Would that be, well, your fear might be the wrong word, but would that be your biggest long-term concern, I suppose, going forward?
Oh, 100%, yeah, absolutely. Because apart from anything else, I have quite a reasonable effect on the market because I work for At the Races, which is the biggest horse racing website around. I'm the lead tipster. You know yourself if you have a following of any kind, and particularly when you're tipping every day and sometimes it's in low-grade races, you're going to have quite a big effect on the market. People then make note of that, and they're trying to get ahead of the market. And you also have an impact if you're successful. The methods that you use, if you're writing them out every day like I am and basically saying why you think horses are valuable or why you think they're overpriced and things like that, people are going to take note of that, and they're not necessarily going to wait till 9 o'clock the next morning to place their bets. And there's a lot of people who contacted me who are now tipsters in their own right and got their own tipping websites who've been followers of mine for a long time, and they're now putting their tips out, quite often the evening before and things like that. And so gradually, especially if you are doing it in the public eye, but even if you're not, things can change. I've noticed quite a few things that have worked in the past. Sectional Times is a good example. They've become much more in the public domain and much more widely discussed. A lot more people have picked up on them. They're a lot more readily available now. So horses that 7 or 8 years ago were opening up at 12 to 1, perhaps, a horse that had run a promising debut from a sectional point of view might have opened up at 12 to 1. You'll find it's opening up at 9 to 2 now, and by 8 o'clock at night, the night before racing, it's 5 to 2. It really is, there really has been there can be that kind of a change in the way that prices fluctuate. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had a poor year last year. I don't think it was all just randomness. I think, and I've not done great this year either. And you are going to have periods where the edges that you have are going to erode away a little bit, and you have to start trying to find new ones. And you have to try and adjust. I mean, the kind of stuff that I've been doing, the kind of methods I've been using over the last 2 or 3 years are very different to the ones that I was using when I first started in 2009, 2010, for instance. I was using different kinds of things then. and I've adjusted a few times since. It does get harder all the time. And there's also the factor as well that as you get older, various of your faculties are going to be less sharp than they used to be. At some point the game will overtake me. There's no question about that. It'll happen to most, if not all of us. But you've just got to keep chipping away and trying to find a way of staying ahead of it for as long as you can.
And in terms of edges, do you think could it be like fashion in that some edges where there was a big edge, 10 years ago, let's say, for example, could it be that those edges, having been eroded and become more popular, that as time goes on and people move on to different things, that they could come back around again and become profitable angles again? Or do you think once it's gone, people know about it, it's gone, it's never coming back as a real edge?
I think so, but probably more because other angles are being overbet. It's probably the same thing that we're discussing here, but yeah, I mean, if I'm trying to think of an example, let's say there's a maiden, and there's, in a typical maiden where there's the clear form choice that's finished second 3 times and has probably run to a level of around 90, and then the horse that's run once ran to 75, really promising, bit of a sectional upgrade. 10 years ago, it might have been 4 to 6, the one that's finished second 3 times, and 72 second favourite, the second one. Nowadays, they might be almost the same price, and there will come a point when that kind of progress happens, when eventually the exposed one that's got the 3 seconds to its name might actually start being the value. I'm sure there's cases where it's already happening. So yeah, as some things, you're right, as some approaches become fashionable, others by necessity are going to become less fashionable because it's a kind of opposite kind of approach.
Yeah, like I have had a thought myself for a few years now that, you mentioned in part 1 that there's so much more information out there. I think that the average level of race reading ability and betting knowledge amongst the public has climbed quite significantly in the last 20 years, we'll say, since the internet has become a day-to-day part of our lives. It has become easier to get better at things, and it is hammered into so many observers of racing and bettors from quite an early stage that you have to try and be a little bit clever and a little bit different. And there's an awful lot of people that are a little bit clever and a little bit different, and that one wonders, have we got to the point where such a large part of the market is looking for that clever horse, looking for that eye catcher, that the more obvious horse is becoming fractionally that bit bigger of a price over time, and that could it be that the more obvious horse is becoming better value than they were 20 years ago, say, for example?
Definitely. I'd say over the last couple of years, one thing I have noticed is that I'm more and more looking at horses and considering tipping horses that have already halved in price overnight. I try not to look at the prices the night before, so I try to come in with a rough price. I don't necessarily price them up in a tissue because I'm trying to cover too many different races, but I'll have a rough price in mind. But I'll then go back once I've looked at the race the next morning, and I quite often find that the horse I'm still interested in was actually more than double the odds the night before. And if that's the case, other horses are going out, and you sometimes find yourself looking at a race and thinking, well, I still quite like this horse, but the more obvious one, or 2 or 3 of the other more obvious ones, have drifted to a degree that they're starting to become valid. I've often said that about when people say, oh, Q, you've spoiled the price on such and such a horse. I often say that when I look at a race sometimes at midday now, I would be backing a completely different horse to the one that I tipped, because my one's come in and there's been a couple of others have drifted out, and if I was starting again from scratch, I might actually be having a bet on something completely different.
I'm almost afraid to ask the question to you, but we've talked about past edges and current edges. Do you see anything right now that has the potential to be the next, let's say, sectional timing in the last 5 or 6 or 7 years has been the coming thing in terms of an edge that's been there? Do you see at the minute any area that could become the next sectional timing, to put it that way?
I'll be honest, I don't know that I do. I'm not just being coy there. I don't think I've identified something that's really not been hit upon yet. Let me have a think. I haven't really thought about that.
But I just thought, while you're thinking, I'll put a suggestion in your mind, because when sectional timing first started to be written about in the racing press here, you tend to get, initially it'll get greeted with skepticism, and you'll get plenty of people who take great joy in throwing stones at it when it doesn't work out and all that. I could see, striding analysis is in a not dissimilar stage at the minute. We had Visionary last year, and you saw how people rejoiced in throwing stones in the wake of that saga. And it's quite an unexposed thing at the minute, mostly I think because it's quite hard to harvest that data. That's been my main project during the lockdown personally. Actually, I've been doing a lot of harvesting of striding data, mostly stride frequency rather than stride length for Irish racing, and I'm finding it quite interesting. And there are large enough banks of data there from total performance data that show strong enough correlations to me to believe that it's worthwhile. So for me, if there was an area in my mind that was going to become more popular, whether it'll represent a big betting edge for people, time will only tell. But I think in terms of an area that I can see developing further and getting more column inches and more attention in the years ahead, if I had to pick one, I think that would be it.
I've only played around with it. I've probably, if you ask me how many horses I'd selected so far on the basis of stride data, it'd probably be about 2, literally, altogether. It's something I've had a look at. It's sometimes maybe had a slight impact. It's been something I've used, but I haven't really looked into it in enough detail yet. I must admit that was something that until Simon Rowland started talking about that, I hadn't really looked at it in any detail. Whereas, for instance, sectional times, which Simon talks about a lot, I've been kind of doing my own thing on that. Not in the same way that Simon did it, but I'd been doing my own kind of studies on that for many years. Stride length, stride data, I haven't done anything at all on. So I'm still at sort of stage A with that. But it's possible. I suspect I think it's even more niche than sectional times, probably.
Definitely,
sectional times, you can look at something and see an upgrade and put it in your tracker. It's a 2-second thing, and you end up. The one thing about stride data is you might find that not necessarily everybody's picking the same horses. Sectional times, you tend to find that the standout ones, everybody's back, and they're the ones that the prices go at 4 o'clock, some of them, when the market's open in the afternoon over here. But I think we'd probably be some way off that happening with stride data at the moment. I'm not saying there aren't some more subtle ones with sectional times where there is still value, by the way, but yes, absolutely. I'll probably think of something tomorrow that I think might in terms of the next big thing.
Well, just to bring it back to something a little bit more fundamental, I suppose, Hugh, and that's staking plans. I suppose it's an area that there's loads of really good reading out there for anyone that is interested in finding out what the technically correct approach to it is. I know that there's relatively limited scope for you in your column to fully put across how you might stake. But what are your views on that in general?
Well, in general, my views are probably slightly coloured by the environment for most people in terms of getting bets on. I'm not talking about people who are putting larger amounts of betting on, in that it's so hard to get on that if you think you're a winning punter, I'd almost be inclined to say just get what you can on all the time, because if you think you're going to win and you're careful with each of your bets. I know I find that with myself. If I can get a bet on with a bookmaker, and there's probably only one bookmaker who'll really accommodate me nowadays, I'll just bet up to the maximum. They'll let me win every time. So there's no real staking plan involved anymore for that reason. Regarding my column, when I started throughout the races, there was a 5-point staking plan, and I started off following that, and I would put 5-point bets up. But I looked at the end of my first year, and I thought that it was skewed. I know I had one. I was showing a 500-point profit, which is my biggest profit by a fair way, but I was nowhere near as good a tipster that year as perhaps in some of the later years. So I think it was skewed slightly, but I had a 4-point win bet on a 25-1 chance, and I don't think that gave an accurate depiction. But secondly, if you're telling people that if your normal bet is a 1-point bet, and then there's a 25-1 shot that you fancy, and you're telling them to get 5 times the stake on in the current climate, that's very, very difficult.
Yeah, it's not realistic as well.
If somebody's regular stake is £10, and I'm telling them to get £50 on a 25-1 shot at 9 o'clock in the morning, that's not realistic. So I just felt that 1 point with the occasional 2-point bet when, I felt strongly about something or I felt the value was good.
Yeah, and I suppose in terms of a general piece of advice you could give, Joe Punter that might be looking at this, I know I'd be suggesting, try to keep it as consistent and as little variance as possible. If your regular bet is 50 quid, don't go having a grand on something.
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably for a small punter starting off, it makes sense to just keep to fairly regular stakes until you find out what your strengths and weaknesses are. Yeah. I must admit, I'm not really an expert on staking plans. I've always been a bit haphazard, and I wouldn't like to say to people, copy the way I do, because it's not necessarily the right way.
Yeah, and like we said, there's lots of good reading there. People have thought about this in some depth. You have the Kelly criterion, and you'll hear about half Kelly and things like this. There's plenty of reading online that you can go a little bit deeper in that particular subject. But Hugh, right now we're going to wrap up part 2, and we'll be getting ready to go for part 3, in which we'll be talking about owning winners, breeding winners, and the impact that those experiences have had on both of us as race readers and punters. So please join in for that. That'll be online soon.